Coming up ahead in this episode of Xtalks Spotlight.
Understanding the safety and efficacy, not in just one specific patient population, but in the appropriate patient population and in diverse populations is really needed. Otherwise, it can negatively impact how those treatments then are effective or safe for patient populations, but also can lose interest for patients if they don't feel like the research that's coming forward is representative of them.
If we don't consider the unique needs of various communities, we risk perpetuating health disparities and really excluding certain groups from medical advancements. That is why DEI ensures equal access to care and scientific progress, thus improving outcomes for all, truly.
Hello, and welcome to Xtalks Spotlight, illuminating insights from subject matter experts and industry thought leaders. I'm Sonia Hunt. In this episode, we're asking the question, what influence do CROs have on improving DEI across the healthcare industry?
Equal opportunity to healthcare is not just a topic of discussion. It requires thoughtful planning and intentional implementation. In clinical research, this includes designing trials that elevate the patient voice, reduce barriers to participation, and are representative of patients who will ultimately use the medical products. In this Xtalks Spotlight edition, I sat down with two experts from Premier Research, Sarah Cross, Vice President, Global Head of Medical Affairs, and Beatrice Doe-Printemps, Patient Engagement Specialist, to learn about the significance of DEI in clinical research, the steps that regulatory bodies are taking to advance it, and how clinical research organizations, in partnership with key stakeholders, must evolve trial design and operational strategies to support DEI initiatives. Thank you for taking the time in the Spotlight interview, Sarah and Beatrice.
Well, thank you so much for having us. It's really an honor to be here talking on such an important topic.
I completely agree. Definitely happy to be here. Thank you.
So to start us off, what is the significance of DEI in clinical research?
Thanks so much, Vera. That's a great question. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are essential in clinical research to ensure that all populations, especially those historically underrepresented, have access to safe, effective treatments. Clinical trials have historically been biased towards certain demographic groups, oftentimes excluding women, people of color, and other marginalized populations. As an African-American woman in this field, I recognize the importance of including diverse populations to ensure that our results are applicable to the wider population. If we don't consider the unique needs of various communities, we risk perpetuating health disparities and really excluding certain groups from medical advancements. That is why DEI ensures equal access to care and scientific progress, thus improving outcomes for all, truly.
That's great. I'll just like to add maybe on what Bea has shared with us already, in that, clinical trial participation really doesn't consistently represent patient communities affected by the disease or by the condition under investigation always, right? We've seen a lot of lack of representation. And so really thinking about the importance of diversity and inclusion, we really want to try to overcome obstacles as it relates to representing diverse populations within medical research. Importantly, understanding the safety and efficacy, not in just one specific patient population, but in the appropriate patient population and in diverse populations is really needed. Otherwise, it can negatively impact how those treatments then are effective or safe for patient populations, but also can lose interest for patients if they don't feel like the research that's coming forward is representative of them. So enhancing diversity facilitates our ability to generalize research findings across patient populations, enhance broader understanding of the disease and of medical products among broader patient communities, and understanding of targeted therapeutic strategies, which is really important as well, which is crucial to reducing disparities and advancing equity in medical research.
And what are the main barriers that underrepresented populations face in participating in clinical trials? And how can these obstacles be reduced?
There are actually several barriers that they face. Trust is a significant issue historically. medical research has been misused, and people of color, especially African Americans, have suffered due to unethical practices. We have to think about things like the Tuskegee syphilis study, or even Henrietta Lacks, her HeLa cell line that has been extensively used in medical research without her consent. So this distrust then prevents people from wanting to participate in clinical trials. Another barrier is access to information. So many communities do not have the resources nor educational materials available for people to be able to make informed decisions about trial participations. There is also logistical barriers such as transportation issues, childcare, or just really people not having the time to be able to join due to work or family commitments. In order to reduce the obstacles, we must build trust through transparency, education, and community engagement. We really have to involve communities in trial design, planning, just communicating the benefits of joining in trials and just participating and ensuring their voices are ultimately heard. Because if we can make also trials more accessible through with transportation or even flexible hours, having multilingual resources can really remove those practical barriers. Additionally, culturally competent recruitment strategies are key to ensuring diverse communities are not only invited but feel welcomed and loved.
And could you talk a little bit about what steps regulatory bodies are taking to advance DEI in clinical research?
There's a number of key steps that regulatory bodies are taking to advance DE&I in clinical studies. An important step was the release of the recent FDA draft guidance for clinical trial diversity this year. So that took place in June of 2024, which outlined the proposed requirements for implementation of racial and ethnic diversity action plans. The key piece here is that it's, guidance for our sponsors, for industry partners like CROs to partner together to pull through a component of medical research that has historically been missing. And through these diversity and action plans, the intent is to support increased enrollment of participants of historically underrepresented populations and help inform on broader spectrum of patients who may potentially benefit from medical products. Now, I'll comment that while the draft guidance largely focuses on late-stage studies, the FDA does encourage that these are pulled through and implemented comprehensively across the asset development lifecycle. We know that early phase studies are really important for patient populations in terms of outlining safety outcomes and looking at dosing regimens. And so if we don't bring these diversity plans in place early on, we're losing a really rich component to help inform on the overall development of that asset. I think it's important to note that when we think about diversity and inclusion, we're making steps, as we just mentioned, with the recent FDA guidance. And there's been historical steps that have been made, but we still do have a long way to go. If we take a look back to 1977 as an example, the FDA issued guidance excluding women of childbearing age from participating in early phase studies. The context was kind of construed to take into account all studies at that time. And part of that was really that protectionist climate, thinking about preventing, birth defects that were found to be associated with maternal use of certain treatments, such as thalidomide. And so what the downstream implications are of, reducing diversity and inclusion in that context was we lost a lot of rich information as it relates to gender. It wasn't until 1993, which doesn't seem that long ago, that Congress passed a law requiring inclusion of women in clinical research. So we're making steps, but there's still a lot that we can do to move this forward. And by leaning in our regulatory guidance and partnering to help address guidance, to help inform policy, to really create a broader stakeholder network will not only be able to inform on sex and gender, but importantly be able to inform on also, racial and ethnic components, as well as other differing factors among patient populations to ensure that the research that we're doing and the medical products we're bringing forward are representative of all.
Now, how can trial design and operational strategies evolve to support DEI initiatives throughout the product lifecycle?
I'll refer back to what Bea, kind of alluded to in an earlier comment. Really, there are a number of strategies that we can take to inform trial design, operational strategies to support DE&I. A couple of them come to mind, which are protocol design being one of them. I think if we think about in and exclusion criteria, we not only have to do that from a sponsor perspective, from a clinical operation perspective, and from a regulatory perspective, but importantly, we really need to think about that from a patient-centric approach. And when we do bring in the right patient voices to help inform on that early in asset development, we really start to understand how we can inform our protocols to be more inclusive of diverse populations. That's part one. Part two, from an operational perspective, really thinking about how are we planning this study? What does it mean for those participants to be in this trial? And are there items of the operational strategy that might preclude some patient populations from being able to participate? And if so, how do we reduce those barriers? So again, really leading in on the patient voice early on to inform on what does that look like? Where might we think about having decentralized components of studies to reduce barriers of having to go to a site for a visit? How might we think about using wearables or other, tracking medical tech devices to help facilitate inclusion? There are a number of things that we can do, as well as things like finding sites that are close or in the communities that we're trying to serve with the research that we're bringing forward.
So, to bring us back to our main question, how are CROs shaping the future of DEI in clinical research?
I love this question. I'll say maybe I'm a bit biased being part of a CRO like Premier, but I think CROs play a critical role in shaping the future of DE&I in clinical research by proactively, leaning in on regulatory guidance and also helping to shape and inform that over time. And importantly, part two, really thinking about what is the diversity and inclusion framework that we need to establish with our sponsors, with our patient advocacy groups, with our site networks, and with other service providers to find that, sustainable and replicable program that can improve trial representation across communities. As a CRO, we play a large role in elevating the patient voice, as I mentioned before, bringing that patient voice in to inform on protocol design, understanding what barriers are so we can reduce barriers to enrollment, and ensuring that our study endpoints not only represent regulatory criteria, but also importantly represent what are important to patients and what's important to all patient populations in a study. And I think, one of the key things that Premier has had the luxury and honor to be a part of is a landmark consortium called Reflections. This group is coming together across industry. It's the first of its kind to deliver an independent grassroots collective across patient advocacy experts, across medical sponsors, across advocacy groups, clinical trial sites, site networks, community partners, and communication specialists, where we're looking to really inform on diversity and access to clinical research participation.
Awesome. I love what Sarah said. And I'd just like to add that CROs have a unique opportunity to really shape the future of DEI in clinical research. By integrating DEI into their operations, they can ensure that trials are not only compliant, but also actively promote inclusion. And we know how important that is. This positions CROs as key drivers of change, helping to create an environment where equitable participation becomes the standard and not the exception.
Well, thank you very much, Beatrice and Sarah, for speaking with us today. We really appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you so much, Xtalks, for having us. We are really happy for this opportunity.
I echo everything B has said. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with Xtalks on this important topic, and we look forward to seeing how collectively we can foster diversity, equity, and inclusion in medical research.
We look forward to learning more about Premier Research's initiatives to advance DEI in clinical research. Thank you all for joining us for this Xtalks Spotlight feature. We hope you enjoyed the discussion.